right. Wonderful. Well, hello and welcome everyone to this discussion with Board President Aaron Peskin. My name is Nick Ferris. I am the chair of the Telegraph Hill Dwellers Neighborhood Engagement Committee, but I am also a member of every single one of these sponsoring organizations. My one plug here tonight is that if you're a member of one group, you can join the others. They are all fine organizations doing great and meaningful work in their own areas, including putting together this one. Now, I know folks can't see this, but we have a very full crowd here so far, already 85 folks logged in. The structure of tonight is we'll start with some moderated questions for President Peskin and then shift over to some audience question and answers. At the bottom of your screen, there should be a section for you to type in questions. So please write any questions that you may have right there. We have a team reading through those to identify common topics or questions. They'll then share those back with me and we'll ask our very special guest these questions directly. Lastly, I just want to say a big thank you to all of the sponsoring organizations and their boards for helping make this possible, with a specific call out to Carol Ann Rogers and Joyce Kucharvi from Russian Hill Neighbors, Diana Taylor from Barbary Coast Neighborhood Association, Bruno Cantor from North Beach Neighbors, Howard Wong and Mark Bruno from the District 3 Democratic Club, and Greg Giacchino and Peter Stevens from the Telegraph Hill Dwellers. This really took a village to put on. But President Peskin, thank you very much for joining us. We know your time is always precious, but even more so now that you're president of the Board of Supervisors. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Nick, and thank you to all the sponsoring organizations. I'm Aaron Peskin. I'm sure if I could see this whole gallery, I know all of you or many of you, and thanks for gathering this evening. I wish we could do it in person. Actually, the number one thing about the pandemic kind of sort of being over that I've enjoyed is actually seeing people in person. So I'm sorry that I'm still talking into a computer screen. It's been a couple of 3 rough years. I keep remarking to myself that part of the ethos of this city is the great earthquake and fire of 1906. And so much of our lore and so much of our public policy is so centered around that, whether it's bonds that we put on the ballot for resiliency and seismic safety, whether it's the honorific, like the 117th anniversary of the great earthquake last week, where people showed up, not me, I was sound asleep at 5:45 in the morning at Lotta's Fountain. But it's interesting to me that a dozen years later in 1918, we actually had the Spanish influenza, worldwide global pandemic that killed scores more people in San Francisco and throughout the world than the great earthquake and fire ever did. And it was kind of lost to history, largely because of the stigma associated with disease. And it's interesting because while fire and resiliency and earthquake preparedness has been part of what I have learned since I was first elected 23 years ago, preparing for a pandemic was not. So just a little observation, but it has been a long couple of 3 years. I think we all learned how to build the plane as we were learning to fly the plane. I'm actually very proud of San Francisco. We did many, many things right during that pandemic. We were the first to close. We had the lowest urban transmission rate and fatality rate in the United States of America. But in the same breath, we were also, I think, in denial, not just the government, but private businesses, particularly in the downtown, about how quickly office would rebound, how quickly the tourist sector would rebound. Those are the 2 geese that laid the golden egg. But let me just start by speaking a little bit about something that all of us are aware of, or hopefully are aware of, which is something that happened last night. I have been under the weather, and so I went to bed at the untimely, early, ungodly hour of 10:30, only to be woken up at 11 by the president of the North Beach Business Association, the lovely Ida Zabi of Cafe 3S fame, who was actually out of town but had already heard about a multiple shooting that had happened minutes earlier at the corner of Columbus and Grant Avenue, wherein one person died and 4 people were injured. This is just unbelievable and frightening as hell. Although I've been around long enough to remember a series of homicides on Broadway that have thankfully been relegated to the past, and that's actually been pretty calm in recent years. You're going to hear a lot more about this in the media tomorrow, but I want to let you know what I learned not only at midnight, not only at 1 when I was reawoken, not only at 4 when I was reawoken again, and at 5:30 when I was reawoken again, and in the numerous conversations I've had today with the head of investigations, the assistant chief of police, and others in our law enforcement world, which is as awful as this is, it was not random. It was a targeted attack. The attackers and the attacked, the victims, are not from San Francisco. They are from Sacramento County, Solano County, and Contra Costa County. And while this is an ongoing investigation, and I am limited in what I can and should say because of the nature of that investigation, I am very confident that not only was this not random, but that an arrest will be made tonight, and that the perpetrators are known to us and we know where they are and will be apprehended, and you will hear more about that tomorrow. I think this is extremely aberrant. I don't want people to jump to conclusions. We had a very high profile tragic murder of an individual a few weeks ago, which I think is now known to everybody, wherein there was a lot of speculation about public safety. It turned out to be 2 people who knew each other. It was likely a premeditated murder. So I want people to, not rest easy, because having this happen in our community is very unsettling, but it was not random. And I am thankful that, given that some 10 rounds of bullets were fired, that no non-involved bystanders were injured or killed. And so I just want to allay people's fears. This really appears to be a one-off from folks out of town who are coming to do their crazy stuff here. And I'm happy to answer within the boundaries of what I'm allowed to talk about as much as I can, but I have to be a little careful because, as I said, it's an ongoing investigation. Yeah, sorry, Nick.
No, thank you for sharing that. I think, it sounds like we'll learn a lot more about it tomorrow. If folks do have questions, put them in there in the chat, and we can get to these towards the end. Thank you for hitting that head on. That was something that I think is all that's very top of mind for probably everyone on this call, being so close to home. So it sounds like we're going to learn more tonight and really tomorrow about this.
Yeah, I think the individual won't be booked until the morning, so you probably won't hear stuff until midday or tomorrow afternoon. The police have actually, as of a few minutes ago, matter of fact, the head of investigations promised to text me during this meeting to tell me whether or not the arrest has been made, because if that happens while we're on this call, I'm allowed to tell you that. But if an arrest is made tonight, the individual won't be booked until the morning. The police did just release the places where these individuals hail from and their ages. They're all young people in their 20s, 2 from Sacramento County. I can look at it, 1 from Contra Costa County, and I believe 2 from Solano County.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we all wish speed with that investigation. So moving forward,
I do want to say one other thing, though, which is the head of investigations very specifically told me to thank the community, because the video footage at local businesses and folks and photographs that people took last night have been instrumental in the investigation. So he actually wanted me to thank the community for being super on the spot and responsive to the investigation.
Now, we organized this webinar initially as a chance to learn what our district and city plans to achieve over the next 2 years. There's no one better to answer this question, I think, probably than you. Can you maybe talk a little about, what are your priorities as both supervisor of District 3, but also president of the Board of Supervisors? And, what do you think we realistically can achieve during this time?
Why does it say that I'm connecting to audio? Why am I appearing twice? Now I'm appearing 3 times. I don't know. But you can see me and you can hear me, Nick?
Yes, I can.
Good. Well, since the last time I saw many of you, my colleagues saw fit to re-elect me to a position that I had a long time ago. I think I had that position for 4 years from 2005 to 2009, which is the president of the Board of Supervisors. Every 2 years, the 11 members of the legislative branch of government hold an internal election to determine who will be the president of the board for that next 2-year period. It was actually a fascinating afternoon or morning at the Board of Supervisors. I did not actually intend to run for board president. It was quite an unexpected day. But long story short, after the board, there's no rules to this game. And after the board got stuck after 10 rounds of voting, I entered nomination and then won on the, I think, 17th round, which sadly was 2 more rounds than it took McCarthy to become speaker. But we're all getting along. It was interesting going up to the dais as the newly elected president, albeit it's my 3rd go around doing it, insofar as I didn't prepare a speech. And so I found myself speaking extemporaneously, and I said what I thought, which is this is not a moment in our time or in political time for infighting. This is a time where we have some extraordinary challenges, albeit they are accompanied by some interesting opportunities. And my job is to coalesce the board, to have people forget about and put aside old divisions, and not only coalesce the board as a entity, which is difficult to do because a body has 11 people and they are elected by different constituencies. And it makes sense that Catherine Stephanie is the representative of the Pacific Heights District 2 area, and it makes sense that Dean Preston is the representative from the city's most progressive district, the Haight-Ashbury. But my job is to coalesce them, to get them to talk, and moreover, to get us as a body to collaborate maturely with the mayor, and to put aside divisions there. And that is what I've endeavored to do over the last now 100 days. And it's come with some benefits. And look, in addition to COVID, which I've been saying was not just a physical healthcare crisis, it also was a psychological crisis. And the psychological impacts of COVID are still with us, and I think are going to be with us for a long time. I mean, people who were shut in, who didn't have the level of human contact that we need to sustain ourselves, a generation of kids who miss normal schooling, which is now playing out in all sorts of painful ways, including unprecedented, behavioral issues and violence in schools that we have not seen the likes of. And I think part of the government's responsibility is to show people that we are getting along and that we are bridging across lines. And so let me say a little bit about the challenges. I think we know what they are. I mean, it wasn't just windows breaking during our large winter storms and our slower than anticipated economic recovery, but it's also about a sobering budget deficit, which is now pushing $1 billion over the next 2 fiscal years that this mayor and this board of supervisors have to balance. It's also about the reality and the perception of public safety that I want to speak to a little bit. And what I would like to do over the next 2 years is not only listen, but take action to really address the economic recovery, to reimagine and balance what downtown needs with what our neighborhoods need. And part of that is very important because I am delighted that I was looking at all of the sales tax data, which is broken down into 67 distinct units, wherein I saw that the first quarter of, was it the first quarter of this year or the last quarter? No, it was the last quarter of last year. North Beach was producing more sales tax than the last quarter of 2019 before the pandemic. That was music to my ears. And we've all seen it. We've seen, it was very interesting. We all came together, North Beach neighbors and Russian Hill and the North Beach Business Association and Telegraph Hill to support a vacancy tax in March that was on the ballot in March of 2020 as a, depending on how you want to look at it, incentive or disincentive to property owners for leaving their ground floor commercial neighborhood commercial spaces vacant. And the world changed overnight 2 weeks later when we went into a hard lockdown. But I am delighted that our number of ground floor retail vacancies are less today than they were prior to the pandemic. And downtown, on the other hand, sales tax is down by a whopping almost 40%. We have 30 million vacant square feet of downtown office. And look, let's be real. I cannot, hold, sorry for the inappropriate reference, a gun to Mark Benioff's head and tell him to make his employees come back to work. I think we have to acknowledge, and we're slow in acknowledging, both downtown office building owners as well as the government, in acknowledging that the nature of work is profoundly changed, particularly in the tech sector, where you want to know what? If people are as productive and they're doing it from their living room with the cat on their lap, and they only want to come in a couple of days a week, there's no law that we can pass to change that. But we can reimagine things, and there are opportunities for downtown. And to that end, the mayor and I came together. We listened to a group of stakeholders downtown and moved very, very quickly to change a whole series of laws that will ease the path to converting commercial, i.e. office space, to residential space. That's not going to happen overnight. As my friend from what I used to call the Committee on Jobs, everybody rebrands their names, and it's hard for an old guy like me to keep up. They're now called Advanced SF. Mr. Wade Rose said, there is no silver bullet, but there is silver buckshot, and the legislation around conversion of office to residential is one of those pieces of silver buckshot. In the neighborhoods,
President Peskin?
Yeah, sure.
One question. Just sort of fine tune that a little bit. A big part of the job, it's clearly bring people together. You mentioned a bunch of incredibly important things. Sobering a budget deficit. Yes. The difference between this reality and perception of public safety. Talking about downtown's economic recovery. Balancing the needs of neighborhood with economic recovery there. Are there some that, from your eyes, are more of a pressing priority? I mean, all of them are incredibly important. Are some, how do you rank those? Or how do you approach that? Which is top priority now versus a longer term? Or
So, Nick, I think you just hit all of the big ones. And the answer is you don't want to do too many things badly. You want to do a few things well. I think you just kind of put your finger, or I've put my finger, or we've all put our finger on the top priority issues for the city and county of San Francisco, and happy to take them one by one. And let's start with the budget deficit. We all are led to believe that we have a $14 billion budget as the city and county of San Francisco. That is true, but it is a little misleading because it does not differentiate between the types of departments and types of money that we have. That includes an airport that does not use a single tax dollar. As a matter of fact, it generates money for the general fund, not a lot, but that is over $1 billion of that $14 billion budget. That includes our public utilities department, which is your water that you get out of your tap, your wastewater, and all of the municipal electricity that serves our public buildings, that serves our muni electrified lines, that serves all of our city streetlights. That is a $2 billion a year department that does not benefit from sales tax, property tax, et cetera. But that's part of that $14 billion. The general fund of San Francisco is approximately half that amount. The cuts, which over 2 years are about $790 million, they've grown a little bit, are going to be very challenging. But here are the two things I have to say about that. I've always been a proud progressive supervisor, and I have always said from my first day to this day that fiscal prudence is a progressive value. And the good news for San Francisco is that in good times and bad times, we have balanced our budget on time. As a matter of fact, San Francisco continues to enjoy some of the highest municipal bond ratings of any city in the United States of America. We have some of the healthiest fiscal rainy day reserves of any similarly sized city in the United States of America. So we've got a little bit of room to breathe. I also want to put it in perspective. I have been, as a matter of fact, during the Great Recession, I was president of the Board of Supervisors when we had a $500 million problem on a budget, on an overall budget that was significantly lower than it is today. And we balanced that budget on time and fully balanced. This year will be no exception. It also comes with a lot of opportunity, Nick, which is, hey, in times of richness, decisions are easy. In times of scarcity, you have to do more with less. You have to actually ask yourself the tough questions about where efficiencies can be gathered. You have to ask yourself, what are the want-to-haves? What are the need-to-haves? And you've got to get back to basics. And in some ways, that gets us to the next thing. I am very confident that we will balance the budget. That's not to say there's not going to be a lot of screaming and that it's going to be a lot of fun. And by the way, I think this Board of Supervisors priorities around food security, around affordable housing, around affordability in general, around our most vulnerable populations are clear, and that will be something that the board upholds in the upcoming negotiations that happen starting June 1st when the mayor's budget is released. But let's get back to basics. And what are basics? In a time, particularly after everybody has lived through this pandemic, it is about living in a city where people feel safe and that feels clean. And to that end, let's talk about the numbers. And these numbers are not logical in one perspective, but they make sense in another perspective, which is if you look at the data says that violent crime in a large number of categories ranging from
President Peskin, do you mind before we get into, I want to double click on something. We've talked about balancing the budget. That is the top priority. Well, not that's all very important, but that's obviously the most immediate. And it sounds like it'll stretch out from there. Maybe we can just double click on balancing this budget deficit. One thing as we were preparing for this, one thing that popped up a lot across the organizations was, hey, we're facing the $728 million budget deficit. And SFMTA, they're facing a $216 million deficit. Work at home is changing, commuter patterns, office occupancy rates, downtown tax revenues, right? All these issues are linked together. When federal funding relief ends, and even if, say, the state jumps in and provides some short-term relief, how do we sustain specifically muni public transport in the long run?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And by the way, Muni's predictions as to when they were going to fall off their fiscal cliff turned out to be later rather than sooner. Muni, the SFMTA received approximately a $1 billion with a B dollar cash infusion from the United States of America. That will forestall their fiscal cliff until sometime in 2025. Their needs are on two fronts. On the operational front, which is human resource, people to drive streetcars, buses, cable cars, and do the various tasks of bus cleaning and mechanical work. And on the capital side, which is very expensive, ranging from the keeping all of our rolling stock in a state of good repair, replacing rolling stock, vast array of capital projects. On the operational side, we can forestave the fiscal cliff for a while. On the capital side, here is the sad story. The sad story is for a number of reasons. The Municipal Transportation Agency's general obligation bond did not garner the 2/3 vote, fell about 1% short, which is very interesting because subsequently at the next ballot, over 2/3 of the electorate, this requires a 2/3 supermajority, voted to extend the half-cent self-assessed sales tax that we use for public transportation. So I think that the support is there if the measure had been run differently or better. And I expect that in 25 or 26, you will see another request for a general obligation bond to address the capital side of the MTA. There's also going to be adjustments. I mean, you have to remember that if downtown, depending on how it recovers, continues to lag, approximately 2/3 of MTA service went to, from, or through the downtown core. And now people are moving around San Francisco in very different ways, from outer neighborhoods to outer neighborhoods. So travel patterns have changed. The MTA has tried to keep up with those travel patterns, but it's going to have to adjust accordingly. And this is a public transportation system that used to move about 750,000 people per day. It now moves about 400,000+. It is obviously concerning. I believe in public transportation, want to support it. But ultimately, we're going to have to live in each and every sector within our means. And part of that is fare box recovery, and part of that is ad valorem tax subventions.
What do you think? I'm going to keep this intentionally vague, but what are your thoughts on the central subway? You know, knowing that when this great investment went into this, there's a different world. Ridership looked very different.
I mean, look, it's kind of like my yoga teacher who says all movement is good movement, all public transportation is good public transportation. Were I to use $2 billion differently, but that is a hole under the street, or water over the dam, or under the bridge, we could have that conversation. I think there is definitely a lot of potential there in the future as a connection from Chinatown to the southeast to Chase Center. But there is no question that ridership has not met the projected expectations thus far. Let's be clear, we're not turning it off. And we have a commitment to keep the surface transportation on. And at some point, if we have to make tough fiscal decisions, which are not upon us yet, we will cross that bridge when we come to it. But meanwhile, I mean, look, as you all know, there are a number of MTA bus lines that have not to this day been restored. I mean, I hear from people every day of the week that they want the 3 Jackson back, but the MTA has been very intentional and deliberate in what they brought back, when they brought back which routes, and what their frequency is, and they're trying to serve demand within their budgetary constraints.
I want to jump into probably one of the most talked about issues in San Francisco, and that's housing. There is a proposed regional housing bond by the Bay Area Housing Finance Agency to place a general obligation bond on the November 2024 ballot. basically to finance production, protection, and preservation of affordable housing in not just San Francisco, but throughout the Bay Area. And so this regional bond, if it's approved by voters, is estimated to raise something like $10 billion, which is going to then go towards affordable housing. Can you share a little bit about how this bond works, and do you support it? Why not?
I am the author of the first of the 9 Bay Area counties boards of supervisors of the resolution in support of the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority's proposed bond for November of 2024. Let me say a little bit about what is this entity and how does it work. Some of you may recall the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority, which was a creature of state law that created a regional entity called the Bay Restoration Authority and gave it the power to put a tax on a multi-county set of ballots. That was Prop AA of, can't remember what year, and pursuant to the state constitution, that measure required a overall 2/3 vote from the 9 Bay Area counties combined. And in the case of Measure AA, which those of us who own property pay a $12 per parcel tax, which generates about $25 million a year. I have the pleasure and responsibility of actually being an appointee to the Bay Restoration Authority, and we spend that $25 million leveraging local monies, state monies, and federal monies. We've actually multiplied that money by a factor of about 4, combining with federal and state grants and subventions. The Bay Area Housing Finance Authority is a similar creature. It was created by the state legislature a number of years ago. They actually talked about going out with a regional housing general obligation bond 2 years ago, and ultimately in the dark days of COVID chose not to do that. They seem to be getting serious about doing that on this November's ballot for the 9 Bay Area counties: Marin, Napa, Sonoma, Solano, Contra Costa, Alameda, Santa Clara, San Mateo, and San Francisco. Did I miss any? I think I just got them all. And the polling on that is positive. I don't want to call it great. Whenever you want to get 2/3 of the vote, you want to start out in the 70+% area. This polls just north of 67%. And doesn't give a lot of breathing room. These are tight times. I mean, the Bay Area has gotten more expensive. The cost of living has gone up. People, I think, are feeling financially burdened. So it's frightening. Having said that, the state legislature is contemplating what was done once in the past for school bonds in the state of California, which is a constitutional amendment, which too would have to be voted on by the people of the entire state of California, that would reduce the mandated threshold for affordable housing general obligation bonds from 2/3 to 55%, as they did for financial instruments related to education. And should that pass, it would easily pass in the Bay Area. Hard to look into our crystal ball into November of next year, but it will be an extremely high turnout election, as it will be a presidential contest. And I intend to be at the forefront of local support for a BAFA bond that would bring San Francisco $1.2 billion of affordable housing money over the next decade.
And so it sounds like it's at polling right now. I think you said about 67, and really you want to get this to 70. So as it stands now, well, it needs a little bump up from where it needs some more support. People need to show support for this.
And it needs a campaign. And by the way, I've started campaigns for bonds locally that started below the 2/3 threshold, and the good old thing that's called a campaign got us across that finish line. But you like to start with with room to lose votes, you don't like to start it with the
Of
necessity
course.
of getting more, particularly if you have organized opposition, which in San Francisco is, unlikely.
Yeah. Um,
And also, by the way, just so that you know,
Mhm.
in the Measure AA Bay Restoration Authority parcel tax measure, San Francisco, which voted overwhelmingly in support, carried other counties like Contra Costa that, while they voted a majority, didn't vote a supermajority. So it's a 2/3 blended overall.
Got it. Yep. Important distinction. Um, Moving along here. Something that another one of these, commonly talked about issues, but crime. I think San Francisco crime it's the topic of both sensational local as well as national news, right? We've seen this, how it's suddenly, an event will happen and it'll just transpire all over the world and become, again, quite sensational. Statistically, the violent crime rate in San Francisco is one of the lowest of any major city, but property crime is higher. And the impact of this negative media attention has affected many of our lives and, frankly, businesses. What do you think can be done to turn this perception of crime in San Francisco? Like, how can we change this press narrative about the city?
Yeah, Nick, that's what I was about to touch
Yeah,
on before. I mean, it's a
yeah,
very interesting juxtaposition where your chances of, 1 per 100,000 people of being assaulted, raped, murdered are actually quite low and, very good for American cities. But you are right about property crime, and you are also right that people perceive themselves as being less safe. And you're talking about messaging, you're talking about a narrative. And I want to throw a few things out there for people to think about. One is that national media, particularly right-wing national media, yes, I'm talking about Fox News and the like, used to pick on San Francisco for two reasons. Reason number one was because of our wacky, we should be proud of, most of them only in San Francisco, progressive ideas. We were the home of same-sex marriage. We were the home to the first laws around requiring market rate developers to build affordable housing on site, and the list goes on and on. And that's gotten us, the ire of right-wing media attention. Do not underestimate, Nick, that everybody loves their congressperson, generally speaking, but hates the United States Congress. And our congresswoman was the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, and right-wing media not only put her on a microscope, but treated her disproportionately badly because they wanted to pick on her and pick on San Francisco and pick on her Democratic majority. So, I mean, some of that is stuff that we can do nothing about. And the politics of making people feel less safe is a powerful political tool. And whether we want to believe it or not, we are all susceptible to advertising. We are all susceptible to the biases that we hear from media. I mean, that's why a lot of money is spent on getting us to figure out which kind of cereal we want to buy. Having said that, there are also realities, and the reality is, with a behavioral health crisis and a homelessness crisis that we all see, you feel less safe when there's somebody screaming on a street corner or sprawled out on a sidewalk, because it is unpleasant, even if the chances of them hurting you are statistically low. You feel less safe. So the fact that people feel less safe is not something that we can ignore or poo-poo. What are the responses to that? The responses to that are, and I brought the Board of Supervisors together with the mayor around that, and I think in a fiscally responsible a way as we could, relative to a no excuses $25 million mid-year supplemental appropriation to the San Francisco Police Department. And in the same breath, while we talk about the public commons, people also have to feel good about the public commons and how you perceive it, which is cleanliness. And so I actually accompanied the mayor's $25 million with an additional $25 million that, yes, we had enough of in our rainy day reserves for cleanliness. So it ended up being a $50 million safe and clean package, which is starting to roll out. And I'm seeing it. I'm actually getting emails of seeing it with my own eyes relative to the cleanliness in and around Union Square that has been under a lot of pressure. Was our destination retail zone on the West Coast of the United States. And then let's talk about the recall of Chesa Boudin, and separate and apart of where you fall on his law enforcement and criminal justice policies. There was $10 million spent by the recall forces telling people, advertising to people that you were less safe. And now it's very difficult to put that genie back in the bottle. And so what I am, have been running around and telling the police chief and telling my captain, Doug Farmer, who, by the way, has been superlative, is that this is kind of a no excuses budget. On top of that, we have had trouble recruiting. Now, let me say a little bit about that. Everybody goes, oh, you can't hire cops. You can't hire cops. Is that because you guys, the government's not nice to cops? No, actually, that's not the case at all. As a matter of fact, the same problems we're having in the public sector, people are having in the private sector. You see help wanted signs all over this town for all sorts of jobs. If you want to be a bus driver, I've got a job for you. If you want to be a nurse, I've got a job for you. If you want to be a policy analyst, we've got a job for you. If you want to be a cop, we've got an academy class for you to sign up. And by the way, I'm thinking about this because there's no age limit. But having said that, we identified that while our pay is quite good in San Francisco, Santa Clara outcompetes us. And tomorrow, the Board of Supervisors will be voting on a new memorandum of agreement with the police officers, wherein, and this is going to not be pleasant or easy on the fiscal side, but wherein they will receive a pay increase that puts them on par with Santa Clara. And that will be another aspect to the no excuses. And by the way, as it relates to the fiscal realities of this city, one of the biggest cost drivers, Nick, is personnel. And with the level of vacancies that we have, whether it's in the cop shop, whether it's in the muni shop, just by virtue of those budgeted positions being vacant, that is helping balance the budget. So just so folks know that.
Yeah. Yeah, a bunch to go into there. I mean, it does feel like a lot of money is being spent, I think, on fueling this narrative. Having grown up here, sure as hell feels a lot safer than it did, 5-10 years ago. But this money.
And then Nick, I think there's also something that, and it's hard to articulate this, but I think that part of the psychological, and I'm sorry if I'm sounding like an armchair psychologist, but part of the psychological impact of COVID and our being isolated from one another, and maybe this pre-existed COVID, is, and we got to be nicer. I have found that, and I'm trying to do more of this, that when you acknowledge folks, government workers, department heads, rank and file folks, for going above and beyond the call of duty, and you shout it out and you bring them to a Board of Supervisors meeting, or in the case of the cops, if you show up at Company A's lineup with a certificate of honor for a police officer. We just actually did this for the first time since I have been a member of the Board of Supervisors. Last Thursday, the mayor and I honored 2 police officers from Central Station for going above and beyond the call of duty on a catalytic converter theft in the middle of the night that was objectively dangerous and courageous. And we brought them with their families, and we just said very simply, thank you. And that's part of changing, not the national news media narrative, but that's part of changing the narrative locally, relative to changing the narrative for tourism, which, by the way, is rebounding. I don't know when the last time any of you went down to Fisherman's Wharf. Nancy and I took a little walk down there the weekend before last. It was packed. I went down to Union Square last weekend. It was packed. We're doing a lot of activation of public spaces. But part of it is getting the industry to change the message nationally, regionally, and internationally. And I don't know if you've seen the spots that San Francisco Travel, that because I'm old and they always rebrand, I still call the Convention and Visitors Bureau, have just put up nationally, but it's a really, really good 60-second spot that, by the way, I think fairly doesn't deny our challenges, but reminds people about how special San Francisco is, not only for its physical beauty, but for its people and for its cultural attractions. And by the way, I think we also have to reinvigorate our commitment to the arts and culture. And relative to downtown revitalization, there is a ton of opportunity as rents go down, as places get to be repurposed. And while I have been having now for 6 months a series of conversations with all of the downtown stakeholders, and everything is on the table, and we are willing to put skin in the game, they need to put skin in the game too. And some of the more enlightened property owners, like Boston Properties, that owns not only the Salesforce Tower, but the 4 Embarcadero Center buildings, came to the enlightened conclusion that having vacant space was not serving their needs, and actually attracting arts and culture and other uses there for free, for no rent, would actually help stimulate that geography. And I don't go repeat this because it's still, I know I'm talking to 85 people, but Don Ramon's, which has been a classic San Francisco Mexican restaurant that was in the same location for the better part of a half a century, got kicked out by some Yahoo who wanted to raise their rent. And they are going to announce in the next few days that they are relocating to the Embarcadero Center, overlooking Justin Herman Plaza. Arts folks and individual artists are taking Boston Properties up on that, and others will follow. So remember, I mean, it's urban pioneering. If you remember Soho back in the 70s, that's, I mean, long before it became the gentrified neighborhood it is now, that was a neighborhood that urban pioneers were attracted to. So there's opportunity here too, my friends.
Yeah. Let me, President Peskin, let me shift over here to some audience Q&A. We've got 147 folks on this call. We've got a bunch of questions here. Fortunately, we've been able to pull out some themes. I'm going to ask you just a few of them. Maybe we've got about 12 minutes, maybe we can go a little bit over. I just want to be, try and get in as many of these as we can right here. So one question comes from Barbara Bella, and it has to do with mechanical street sweeping and keeping our streets clean. So similar in a little bit of what we talked about, going to public safety and related to crime. Well, we need to have clean streets. She says, unlike the rest of San Francisco, our district has minimal mechanical street sweeping. Specifically, coverage really seems to drop off when it comes to Russian Hill and Telegraph Hill. Why is it that we don't have this? Is this something we could?
So 2 things on that, or 3 things on that, from somebody who was first elected in the year 2000. Number one is that there are actually many parts of the city that don't have robust mechanical street sweeping regimens, but and I'm not taking your name in vain, Mark Bruno, but when I first ran for supervisor in the year 2000, this was an issue, and I will tell you how it works now, which is right now you get mechanical street sweeping if you get, I think it's 50% of the property owners or tenants on a street block to subscribe their names on a petition to the Department of Public Works. Now, the Board of Supervisors could change that and say, we're taking away that petition process, and we are just going to mandate by law that there will be mechanical street sweeping. And as a matter of fact, in the year 2001, my first year in office, I proposed that for swaths of North Beach. And I heard from a lot of residents that they were less than happy about this, but continued on my merry way. I heard what they had to say, which was they didn't want to move their cars twice or 3 times a week. And I said, I'll tell you what, how about we come to a accommodation of once a week? And that didn't seem to make anybody happy. So I said, okay, well, what if we do something really, why don't we try an experiment and do it once a month? And people were like, well, we won't remember once a month, and then we're all going to get tickets. Long story short, I went to Francisco Middle School, where Mr. Bruno presented me with a petition, and I think the live appearance of some 300 of my neighbors who were adamant that I not do it. And I dropped that proposal. I have tried to do, and you see these people, particularly along the commercial corridors, to institute as many block captain street sweepers, but they are not inexpensive. But the answer, Ms. Bella, is I think the dynamic wherein if somebody can go out and get their neighbors on that block to agree, then there is peace in our time. And if the legislature tries to do it wholesale by fiat, they will be summarily killed. Not the answer you were looking for, but that's my personal experience. So I did not upend that. I did not take that out of the Public Works Code. And by the way, there are weird blocks on Russian Hill where the street sweeper actually goes up there, hits one block, and then goes back down to Columbus Avenue. So you can do it. It has been done.
There's hope. Yeah, 50%. Got to pass that. Okay, there's a bunch of questions here around this theme of retail vacancies. So I think there's 2 converging ideas, well, comments and questions. One, retail vacancies appear to have dropped in North Beach. Why do you think that is? Why haven't other districts like the Castro had similar success? There's something going on here. So that's part of it. And the other section is, we also have some longtime vacant lots. So there's one that's being mentioned, Bay and Mason or Bay and Powell. Are there any plans to build on them? 2 parts.
So let me take the first things first and say this to exactly the appropriate audience, which is that neighborhoods that are better organized, that have better institutions like robust neighborhood organizations and business organizations, know what they want their supervisor to do. You all collectively and as individual organizations are a profound help to me. I mean, when the North Beach Business Association pioneered the first parklets in San Francisco, I was the guy who ran interference with the cops and Public Works and DPW and fire, and that became the law of the land and spread like wildfire. Well, that was pioneered in front of the Cafe Trias, and then it spread up the 1300 block of Grand Avenue, and then it spread around the corner of the 500 block of Green Street, and North Beach never took any time off, and then it was emulated on the Polk Street corridor. And that really is largely thanks to you, and I guess in part to me for listening to you. That has not been the ubiquitous experience in all neighborhoods that aren't as tight and don't have those histories. And part of that, Nick, I think, is also a function of the fact that these are some of the oldest and most established neighborhoods in the city that have organizations that have been around for, in the case of the Telegraph Hill dwellers, getting on to 70 years, or institutions like the Cafe Trias that are of the same vintage, whereas in other neighborhoods, these are relatively recent advents. So, I mean, I think part of it is that. The other part of it is that I think 2 things conspired to do what a capitalist economy needed, an overheated capitalist economy needed, which was reduction in property owners' expectations of values. And I think 2 things did that. One was COVID freaked people out. that they weren't going to get the $12 a square foot that they already weren't getting, and they were holding out for, I mean, someday my, knight in shining armor is going to come along and, lease this place up for $12 a square foot. And meanwhile, I'm just going to let it sit vacant. And I think that the impact of COVID was, you want to know what? I'm going to let some exciting entrepreneur come in here and give it a shot. And we're not going to do it at those kind of price points. The other is, so in March, as I said earlier, the commercial vacancy tax passed. And then it felt really wrong for me to implement it immediately. And it felt that as COVID turned out not to be a 2-week thing and not to be a 2-month thing, I went to the Board of Supervisors and I passed legislation saying that we were not going to implement the commercial vacancy tax for another year. And that year passed and we implemented it. And it is just going into effect this year, 2023. And I think people saw that coming. And the two of those factors conspired to get property owners to have more realistic expectations of value, not want to pay the commercial vacancy tax, want to rent their places while there are people out there. And that has led to an objective reduction in the amount of commercial vacancies. Now, that's not the case all over town, as you said. That's not the case in some other neighborhoods. Some neighborhoods are faring better. Some have more pent-up demand. Some have better neighborhood infrastructure. I hope I have attempted to answer your question. And just going back to the last question, I do want to say that $25 million that, by the way, the Board of Supervisors voted for unanimously and the mayor signed into law is no small drop in the bucket. And I think we'll see demonstrable improvements as it relates to street cleanliness throughout the city and county of San Francisco, and particularly along commercial corridors.
Are you aware, I think, and the second part, just to follow up on that, I think, are you aware of any, again, there have been some long time vacant lots, so what were mentioned, Bay and Mason.
Bay and Powell, just so that you know, which is the home of the former legacy, albeit it was never designated as such, Caesar's Restaurant, if you all remember that. Nick remembers that from his growing up. Was torn down. A replacement project has long been approved for that site, and the developer, who I poke at every once in a while, has yet to pursue their approved entitled development plans. I think right now financing in this economy is difficult to get, although that individual was not moving with due haste even before the market turned down and construction financing became harder to obtain. But it is the site of a fully approved entitled housing project.
I think we've got time for probably just about one more. This is from Anna C. It has to do with housing. So she says, great news at converting former office space to residential. What is the thinking about converting those residential spaces for workforce housing? So largest employers in San Francisco is SF Gov, UCSF, et cetera. Creating this type of housing would make more enticing for these employees to invest in SF, so to stay in SF, and pay taxes, social investment. It also creates stickiness to employment, et cetera.
Yeah, so we're having conversations with institutions, including but not limited to the University of California, and we actually passed on the ballot a couple of years ago at the behest of my then colleague Gordon Marr, a initiative to incentivize educator housing, which we are actually now building as we speak in the Sunset District of San Francisco. But I agree that there are definitely opportunities there. We are looking for ways to incent that. And we are having conversations with the likes of Advance SF and people who are in that industry to figure out what the right ways of going about it. And as I said, my best ideas don't usually come from between these 2 ears. They usually come from folks who are expert and know what they've got and what they need.
Okay. And one last question, actually. 2024 is coming very quickly. Who do you think are legitimate challengers to London Breathe, and why?
Oh, that's a political long time away from now, but it is indeed coming. You will recall that historically mayoral elections were actually held in odd number years and would have been this calendar year, this November of 2023. But last year, the Board of Supervisors, for the second time, there was a similar initiative in 2007. The voters said no. Asked the voters whether or not they wanted to move mayoral elections to presidential cycles where there is much, much higher voter turnout. So it is still 20 months away. We will see who the entrants in that field are. I would imagine that the Mayor Breed will be one of them. We'll see who else emerges in the months ahead. I mean, I will say that my job as president of the board is to work with her and my colleagues to really do the best we can to address our most vexing problems in the next 20 months. And that's what I'm here to do. But we've never had a dull mayor's race in San Francisco, and I'm sure that this will be no exception. I have no idea who will come out of the woodwork between now and, a year from now.
I will say we've had quite a few comments here asking if you'll run, but we can leave it at that.
Yeah, we'll leave it. Let's just say this. I've done this for most of my adult life. Nancy and I wouldn't mind going back to Nepal for a year.
Fair enough. Well, folks, listen, that's it for time here. I want to say a very big thank you to you, President Peskin, for this time, as well as always, just the insightful comments and thoughts regarding San Francisco. So thank you, President Peskin.
Nick, and everybody for the opportunity. Do not hesitate to call or email. And last but not least, we need a little bit of levity in our lives, and congratulations to the Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill and North Beach and Russian Hill for prevailing in that close contest between two worthy contestants, the Sea Lion and the Wild Parrots. And I am delighted that the Wild Parrots prevailed, and the Board of Supervisors found a few minutes to make that the official animal of San Francisco. So just concentrate on some of the good things in life. It's not all doom and gloom. We're still a great city. I'm going nowhere. The one thing I can tell you, Nick, outside of mayoral politics, is I intend to live here for the rest of my life and enjoy this beautiful city.
Absolutely. Well, folks, if you enjoyed this, there are lots more great events being organized. For those who don't know, May is Affordable Housing Month. We'll be hosting an in-person panel and happy hour on Tuesday, May 16th at Lily Coit's at 5:30 with Council of Community Housing Organizations Executive Director and former Supervisor John Avalos, as well as other experts to discuss the future of affordable housing and specifically the future of financing and its relationship with labor. That's on Tuesday, May 16th at 5:30, so look out for an invite. I also want to thank again all the sponsoring organizations. If you're a member of Russian Hill Neighbors, but not the District 3 Democratic Club or Barbary Coast Neighborhood Association, please join, vice versa. If you're not a member of North Beach Neighbors, the Telegraph Hill Dwellers, and so forth, please join them all. All of these are very fine organizations doing similar but different work, and it's just fun to be plugged in with all these different communities. And on that note, have a wonderful dinner and good night.